What's up, YouTube? What's up, YouTube? What the is up, YouTube? Throw an X in the air if you are down to talk about Black History Month. The story of American music is the story of Black music, and Black artists have continuously pushed the boundaries of creativity and expectations. Today we will talk about how the grim darkness of the Black experience helped create some of the most brutal breakdowns in music today. And if you make it to the end, I'll tell you about some of my suggestions for some of my favorite Black musicians in metal today, and a little bit of how I discovered the genre. If this is your first time here, this channel essentially serves as my attempt to impart my parenting philosophy through these essays, especially in the fact that these also serve as an open diary of sorts to my kids to come back to in the future. I like to cover literally all forms of media, usually with some sort of postmodern millennial parent twist. If that sounds interesting, be sure to smash the subscribe button, click the bell, share with anyone who might dig this type of content. Let's hit 1,000 subs. Let's hit partner. Let's go. The origins and roots of rock and roll start all the way back in the 15 to 1600s, deep in the heart of America's South, amidst all the plantations and fields where enslaved Africans were forced to work under brutal oppression and brutal conditions. Despite the suffering, under these conditions a musical tradition emerged, the Negro spirituals. These hymns, infused with African rhythms and Christian themes, served as a beacon for hope and resilience amid the darkness of bondage. The spirituals were more than just songs, they were a means of survival, a form of resistance against the dehumanizing forces of slavery. Spiritual music, more historically known as Negro spirituals, as previously mentioned, got its rise to prominence as a means to not only put a Black spin on the religious teachings of European Christians, but also using their oppressors' judgment of their loud singing and primitive dancing as an open middle finger to the literal whitewashed conformity that was trying to be thrust upon them. During the Great Revival movement, or the Second Great Awakening, of the late 1700s, many groups started passing over more traditional, more dry hymns in favor of the newer, more energetic music being created during this religious movement, taking over the South and starting to head its way west. Religious groups spontaneously created songs using the African call and response and repetitive chorus structures. They also reinterpreted the European psalms and hymns in ways that had meaning to them as Africans in America. They, for example, improvised on the melodies, changed the rhythms, sped up the tempo, added repeat refrains and choruses, and replaced texts with new ones that often combined English and African words and phrases. The final product was an improvised African-style song. These early folk spirituals melded the Christian belief system with native African culture, and from it created something that was uniquely African-American, and by extension, uniquely American. Through their haunting melodies and evocative lyrics, enslaved Africans found solace and strength, forging bonds of solidarity and community in the face of unimaginable hardship. Whether sung in the fields or hummed to children in the dead of night, the spirituals embodied the spirit of a people determined to endure and overcome. By engaging in the singing of these spirituals, the participant experienced a form of freedom. Spirituals evolved into a vibrant form of cultural expression, giving rise to luminaries such as Mahalia Jackson and Thomas A. Dorsey. Their stirring vocals and impassioned performances captivated audiences far and wide, setting the stage for the golden age of gospel music. From the sanctified halls of churches to the smoky confines of nightclubs, gospel music became a rallying cry for freedom and redemption, inspiring generations of artists and listeners alike. So now we're going to fast forward to the early 20th century, and from there, the blues emerged from the fertile soil of the Mississippi Delta. It's a time of transition, with slavery going the way of sharecropping and waves of migration shaping the landscape. Out of this fertile soil emerges the blues, a genre that is raw and soulful as the experiences that birthed it. With its soulful melodies and raw emotional power, the blues became the voice of a generation, playing across juke joints and back porches throughout the South. The blues were deeply rooted in the African American experience, reflecting the harsh realities of life in a segregated society. From broken hearts to broken dreams, blues musicians laid bare their deepest sorrows and desires, transforming personal pain into universal truths. Through their plaintive wails and mournful laments, they gave voice to the struggles and aspirations of a people marginalized and oppressed. Meanwhile, upriver in New Orleans, jazz is brewing. It's a melting pot of musical traditions, blending African rhythms with European harmonies in ways that would redefine music forever. Duke Ellington once famously said, "Jazz ain't nothing but the blues," which highlights the deep connection between the two genres, especially at this point in history. As the blues spread from the Delta to urban areas, it evolves into rhythm and blues, now known as R&B, laying the groundwork for what would become rock and roll. Life in the city was obviously drastically different from that in the rural South, but segregated housing laws facilitated the reestablishment of very familiar institutions. Southern juke joints, for example, transformed into blues bars and became the center for social interaction, especially among young African American men. Singers amplified their instruments and sang through microphones, producing a new and more insistent sound. Band lineups also added drums to the electric guitars and electric bass guitar that had since replaced acoustic instruments. Some bands added amplified harmonicas or a saxophone, while the jazz-infused blues bands added a small horn section. Artists like B.B. King, Muddy Waters, and Howlin' Wolf took this and literally electrified their music, which ushered in a new era of urban blues that would pave the way for rock and roll. Guitarists like Lonnie Johnson used flat picks held between their thumb and first finger of the right hand, playing more complicated melodies on the treble strings. I think you can kind of see where I'm going from here. The electric guitars and electric basses that combined with pianos and drums also made a different sound. One electric guitar emphasized the rhythm while the other played the melody. A special feature of the Chicago blues was the harmonica played into a microphone and through an amplifier like those used for the guitar and bass. Vocals drew on the styles of the blues shouters who sang with jazz bands, and to a lesser extent on the styles of gospel singers elaborating to the melodies and changing the timbre of their voices, sometimes right in the middle of a single drawn-out syllable. From buzzy to glassy, from very raspy to just buttery smooth. The singers were virtuoso guitarists as well, adding in these instrumental responses to their vocal phrases as well. This led to complex melodies and harmonies, and kind of the manifestation of the lead guitar came into fruition. And even during times of these performances, the guitarists would just start improvising and just playing anything that was coming to their mind. I think you can see where I'm going with this. With their searing guitar licks and syncopated rhythms and smoky vocals, these bands were able to captivate audiences with tales of love, loss, and redemption, which laid the groundwork for the musical revolution that was coming. The explosion of rock and roll in the 1950s marked a very seismic shift in popular music, as black and white musicians alike embraced this new sound with fervor. At the forefront of this revolution were trailblazers like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, whose electrifying performances shattered racial barriers and captivated audiences around the world. With their infectious rhythms and dynamic stage presence, they became the icons of a new era, challenging the status quo and redefining the boundaries of artistic expression. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, a gospel singer and virtuoso guitarist, played a crucial role in shaping the early sound of rock and roll. With her soul-stirring performances and boundary-pushing style, she challenged conventions and defied expectations, paving the way for future generations of female artists. She was one of the first to use an electric guitar to incorporate dance moves into her performances. She was also adept at using different techniques such as fingerpicking, slides, vibrato, and tremolo. Tharpe was a prolific songwriter who composed many original songs that became classics in the gospel and rock genres. Some of her famous songs included Strange Things Happening Every Day, Up Above My Head, Down by the Riverside, and Rock Me. She could interact with the crowd, dance, and play the guitar behind her head or on her knees. You better see where I'm going with this. She was also known for her flamboyant outfits and accessories, such as her famous Gibson SG, very flamboyant flower-laced hats. Some of the artists who admired her and learned from her include previously mentioned Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley himself, who actually did give her props later, Little Richard, Johnny Cash, and Bob Dylan. And I mean, it freaking shows. I feel like her influence on this genre, she is one of the forefronts of modern rock and roll. I feel like that can't be emphasized enough. Even Elvis Presley gave these people their dues. It was way after, after basically rock became synonymous with white people. But at the very least, he said it. Meanwhile, Chuck Berry, often hailed as the father of rock and roll, blended elements of blues, country, and R&B to create a sound that was uniquely his own. His pioneering guitar solos and very witty lyrics inspired countless musicians from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones. The prominence of the electric guitar, as played by Chuck and other musicians like Bo Diddley, made the guitar a focal soloing instrument, ultimately dethroning the saxophone from its dominant position it held in rhythm and blues. And in doing so, it inspired millions of college guys and divorced dads around the world to start learning this little 5-string, at the time, instrument. To quote the late great infamous Little Richard, "The blues had an illegitimate baby, and we named it rock and roll. There wasn't nobody playing it at the time but black people. Myself, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry. White kids started paying more attention to this music. White girls were going over to this music. They needed somebody to come in there, like Elvis." Little Richard's flamboyant persona and powerhouse vocals injected rock and roll with a dose of pure energy and a little bit of chaotic good, if I may say so, setting the stage for the genre's explosive growth in the years to come. So to rewind a tiny bit here, in the 1950s and 60s, the urban blues singers also toured in Europe and the United Kingdom. As a result, they had a strong influence on the formation of blues rock groups in the United States and England, including the likes of the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Eric Clapton, and the Dire Straits. Rock music, along with soul and funk, formed the soundtrack of the 1960s itself, an era whose social activism provided the platform for America's youth, their black, white, and brown folks, to all rebel against the evils and banality of mainstream white middle-class society by the way of Black Power, anti-Vietnam War, and hippie movements. With the exception of Jimi Hendrix and a small handful of others, rock became associated with white British and American musicians, largely because of the categories used by companies and the medium of radio to market popular music. Easiest example of this is white musicians going in the rock category, black musicians going in things like rhythm and blues or pop. By the mid to late 1960s, British artists began to cover and interpret black rock and roll and urban blues from the previous 25 years. The British invasion launched with the arrival of the Beatles in the US in 1964 and ultimately evolved into what became known as modern rock music today. During the same period of time, black artists such as Sly and the Family Stone, Buddy Miles, and Jimi Hendrix created a unique rock sound by fusing elements from rhythm and blues, blues itself, gospel, funk, and soul with guitar-centric sounds and innovative technologies. Both Jimi Hendrix and Sly and the Family Stone were among the first bands to perform at the first ever Woodstock, the iconic concert event of the 1960s, and were among the most popular and visible figures in rock and roll at that time. By the end of the 1960s, the genre label rock and roll had been changed to just rock, and was highlighted by musical sound, lyrical content, and the rise of a music-centric counterculture. As rock became distinct from the 1950s and early 1960s former rock and roll style, it acquired a lot of the features that were defined by Jimi Hendrix in his debut album, Are You Experienced? Now, this album featured explosive, fast-paced, blues-based riffs, overdriven amplifiers with high gain and treble to utilize feedback as an instrument itself, which was pretty new at the time, and the use of wah-wah pedals to distort and exaggerate sounds during play, especially during solos, became the new normal. Purple Haze and Voodoo Child are clear examples of these techniques, and as one of rock's most influential artists, Hendrix's guitar style served as the template for numerous other artists, including other black rock guitarists such as Prince, Lenny Kravitz, Vernon Reid of Living Colour, Slash from Guns N' Roses, Tom Morello of Rage, and Brittany Howard of the Alabama Shakes. By the end of the 1960s, rock had diverged into several subgenres such as blues rock, folk, country rock, funk, acid, and progressive rock, which incorporated a lot of elements from classical music. But now we can start talking about the black circumstances that brought us to modern metal of today. So amidst a lot of the counterculture of the 1960s, a new form of musical expression started to kind of emerge from the pit and the grind. That genre is punk rock. In cities like Detroit and New York City, proto-punk bands such as MC5, Stooges, Alice Cooper and the Velvet Underground were pioneering a raw, aggressive sound that changed the status quo. These bands embraced anti-authoritarian themes in their lyrics and performances, setting the stage for a new era of musical rebellion. Within this burgeoning punk scene, black musicians played a pivotal role in shaping the sound and ethos of the genre. One notable example is the band named Death. Formed by the Hackney Brothers in 1973, operating outside the predominantly white underground punk scene, Death created a unique sound characterized by complex rhythms, percussive vocals, and elements of rhythm and blues. Despite facing resistance from record labels and radio stations, Death's uncompromising approach to music paved the way for future generations of black punk and metal musicians. As the punk movement gained momentum in the 1970s and 80s, black artists continued to leave their mark on the genre. Inspired by bands like Iggy and the Stooges and Jimi Hendrix, Pure Hell emerged as one of the most provocative and innovative bands of the era. Their loud, aggressive sound and theatrical stage performances challenged racial stereotypes and pushed the boundaries of punk rock. Despite fighting racism and discrimination within the music industry, Pure Hell's influence on the punk scene cannot be overstated. In the 80s and 90s, as punk and metal evolved into mainstream genres, black musicians continued to play a vital role in shaping the sound and direction of the music. Bands like Living Colour, Fishbone, and Bad Brains brought a new level of diversity and innovation to the scene, blending heavy elements of punk, metal, funk, and hip-hop to create a sound that was uniquely their own. These sounds pushed the boundaries of what was even considered normal for punk and metal music at the time, and in my opinion, that's probably the most punk and the most metal thing that you can do. I would also give a special shout out to Bad Brains, just because their stuff was pretty good. Alright, we're finally in the 90s, and we are finally in the home stretch here. So, the 90s being as radical and extreme and as tubular as it was, I definitely think that this was a moment in time where we saw a lot of basically what we have now. I think one of the most absolutely 90s to 2000 things that came out of this decade was the emergence and influence of nu metal. Now, nu metal was a genre, and once again, a very American genre, that fused elements of heavy metal, hip-hop, and alternative rock into a very unique, very dirty sound. Bands like Korn, Limp Bizkit, and the Deftones emerged as pioneers of this new wave of American heavy metal, and drew inspirations from a diverse array of influences, from Pantera all the way to funk music itself. Sepultura's groundbreaking album Roots in 1996, along with the introduction of Ozfest that same year, played pivotal roles in boosting the careers and the recognition and the mainstream appeal of something like nu metal. Previously stated, the roots of nu metal can be traced back to the fusion of heavy metal with hip-hop and rap, a trend that was pioneered by bands like Anthrax with their 1987 EP, I'm the Man. Anthrax's innovative blend of metal and rap laid the groundwork for the development of nu metal, showcasing the potential for cross-genre experimentation within this new realm of heavy music. Moreover, the influence of funk music on nu metal cannot be overstated, with bands like Korn and Primus incorporating funky grooves and rhythms into their music. Jonathan Davis himself once remarked that he never considered Korn to be a traditional metal band, instead likening their sound to that of a funk band. To quote his Vice interview, "I never thought of us to be a metal band to begin with. Yeah, we're heavy and downturned, but metal to me is like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. That's metal, man. I always thought of us as like a funk band, that funky groovy shit." And you know what? I would be inclined to agree. One of the other bands to emerge from this Ozfest graduating class was also Sevendust. Among the influences of this band, Sevendust has listed Metallica, Anthrax, Ozzy, Steve Vai, Ronnie James Dio, Nine Inch Nails, and I mean, with these names alone, I think you can already see the influence of all of the other past genres we were talking about and how it led us here. The frontman, LaJohn Witherspoon, or Lahan, sorry if I mispronounced that, but LaJohn Witherspoon said that he was influenced by pretty much almost all genres of music. to quote, from R&B to rock to jazz and classical, Witherspoon said that he was influenced by everything. And as the popularity of nu metal began to wane in the early 2000s, a new genre known as metalcore began to take shape. This genre blended elements of extreme metal and hardcore punk into a raw and aggressive sound. Breakout metalcore bands like Trivium, Killswitch Engage, Shadows Fall drew on influences from both metal and punk and hardcore to create a sound that was characterized by very intense breakdowns, heavy guitar riffs, and screaming vocals. The fusion of styles appealed to a new generation of listeners who were drawn to the genre's raw energy and emotional intensity. And I will say, this is definitely when I came into the picture. I was in high school at this time, class of '08, don't hate. And yeah, at the time going into high school, you know, I was all about rap, and that was still like my primary genre for most of high school. I mean, that was when Lil Wayne had his absolutely legendary mixtape run. That was when we got, you know, like the drought and all that stuff. But anyways, my white friends, they were all really into the metal scene. And, you know, when I was hanging out with them, that is what they would play for music. So it was one of those things that over time I got used to it, because at first to me I was like, oh, it just sounds like a bunch of screaming. It all sounds the same. But then as I started listening to other bands, as I started learning about the intricacies of like these different arrangements and all the different ways that you can make these sounds, and just kind of learning more about like the metal scene itself, I very much fell in love. It got to the point that I fronted my own metal band. I'll put it around here somewhere, but yeah, no, I did the whole lead singer thing. I did melody and singing, and then my friend Cassidy, he did the screaming, and I think we did a couple shows, and obviously we would have been the next big thing if it wasn't for the man keeping us down. To say that I was a part of the scene, at least in like my little high school area, would very much be an understatement. And they try to articulate in words what I really love about this genre, and I think it really does come down to just the guttural sounds, especially like you get a good breakdown and you're just sitting there making, you know, the stink face while you're headbanging and stuff. Like so many ingredients of a good breakdown in a metal song can also be applied to like a really good drop in a dubstep or an EDM song, or a really good chorus in something like a trap song. And when I say trap, I mean like trap rap, you know, like Gucci Mane and, you know, a lot of the southern stuff at the time, DJ Screw, whatnot. But at this time, indie and metalcore and garage rock revival started to really kind of take over once again. These are pretty much, you know, bands like The Strokes, The White Stripes, and Jet. And these guys were the new hotness as nu metal's popularity started to decline in regards to something that was at least a little bit more emotional, sympathetic, and just not like hyper masculine, oh, what's up, bro? That kind of energy. I think that this genre, at least at this point in time, was very much defined by bands like At the Drive-In, My Chemical Romance, my personal favorite, Fall Out Boy, and basically just the whole MySpace scene and aesthetic in general. You know, XD, RAR. So in terms of like more of the technical aspects of metalcore, it's really known by its inspirations of extreme metal and hardcore punk, kind of like the late 1980s hardcore. Metalcore is noted for its use of breakdowns, which are slow, intensive passages that are conducted for moshing, while other defining instrumentation includes heavy guitar riffs, often utilizing percussive pedal tones and double bass drumming, which is, you know, a lot of stuff that we can see influenced by even just like some of the early stuff of the performance of Rosetta Tharpe and Jimi Hendrix. Vocalists in this genre typically perform with screaming. More popular bands often combine this with the use of the standard singing for like the melody or the harmony, usually during the bridge or the chorus of the song, which I can basically, if you've been watching this video and paying attention, you could draw direct comparisons to someone like Howlin' Wolf, or even someone like, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy who did I put a spell on you, because his whole shtick was, you know, he's a voodoo witch doctor that also is a rhythm and blues singer. And you could also say Screamin' Jay Hawkins. That was his name, Screamin' Jay Hawkins. But you could also say that his screaming and singing and all that was also inspirational for things, like I said, metalcore bands, goth bands, his whole aesthetic. I could, like, the whole, man, see where I'm going with this? Metalcore was marked by a continued exploration of diverse musical influences, which included elements of traditionally black genres. Bands like Every Time I Die and Maylene and the Sons of Disaster incorporated a lot of southern rock elements into their music, adding a new dimension to the metalcore sound. And you could even say, oh, it was more country or nah. Guess what? Guess what? Country music was originally black too. The evolution of nu metal to metalcore reflects the ever-changing landscape of heavy metal music, with artists continually pushing the boundaries of creativity, innovation, and influences, with the fusion of heavy metal with hip-hop and funk to the emergence of new subgenres like deathcore and electronicore. The journey of nu metal to where we are today is, I think, really a testament to the power of musical fusion, experimentation, and really being able to take inspiration from anything. And like the last thing for this video, the one thing that I always kept in the back of my head, but now that I'm in my early 30s, I can actually articulate it now. From the standpoint of social solidarity, there were several commonalities between the hip-hop community and the punk and metal communities. Despite apparent differences in musical styles, cultural backgrounds, aesthetics, clothing, here are a few key points of convergence. First, there is the anti-establishment sentiment. Both hip-hop and punk emerged as counterculture movements that rejected mainstream norms and values. I'm gonna use punk just as like an umbrella term, so I'm sure you'll understand. They served as platforms for marginalized voices to express their frustrations with social injustices, economic inequality, and political oppression. Whether through aggressive punk anthems or politically charged rap lyrics, both genres provide a voice for those who felt alienated by mainstream society. In the early days of each movement, artists often self-produced their own music, they organized their own shows, and created their own merch. How else were you gonna do it? Think about like the old punk zines, think about mixtapes, things like that, EPs, LPs. This grassroots approach not only fostered a sense of community and self-reliance, but it also allowed artists to maintain creative control over their own work without relying on major record labels or corporate entities. And the last part, I think, would be the inherent social activism, which also breeds and fosters inclusivity and diversity. Yes, I know, but let me explain. Many artists within the hip-hop and punk communities use their platforms to advocate for social change and raise awareness about important issues. Whether it be through things like benefit concerts or politically charged lyrics, artists in these genres sought to inspire action and mobilize their fan bases to confront systemic injustices of their day. This shared commitment to social activism fostered a sense of solidarity among fans and artists alike, as they work together to try and affect positive change in their communities and beyond. And because this type of activism was promoted and shared amongst these communities, it helped foster a sense of inclusivity and diversity within both of them. I mean, I know what you can say about metal and punk and, you know, Nazi punks fuck off and all that, but just hear me out. Despite the stereotypes surrounding each genre, hip-hop and punk have historically been inclusive spaces that welcome people from diverse backgrounds and identities. From the early days of the punk scene's emphasis on non-conformity and individuality, to the multicultural roots of hip-hop and the global appeal of metal, which a lot of it was sprung from the blues and jazz and rock and roll. All of these genres have provided a home for outsiders and misfits that were seeking a sense of belonging. This sense of inclusivity and diversity has been the driving force behind the social solidarity within each community. as fans and artists come together to celebrate their shared love of the music, the culture, and just art itself, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status. So, to summarize this last section here, while hip-hop and punk and metal, they may seem like very distinct musical genres with their own cultures and traditions and history, but they share a lot of stuff, from the very black origin and black roots of all of these to their anti-establishment ethos, DIY, for lack of a better phrase, like one of the few things of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But I think that it's been very interesting to see how, despite many people thinking that these genres and communities or whatever are just like miles apart, they really aren't. They're very much close together. And yeah, I feel like I'm kind of proof of that. I love metal, I love rap, I love pretty much a little bit of everything, including country, which once again is black. And I know it's very cliche nowadays to say, oh, well, I love everything, but I mean, like, especially in doing this video and spending time learning about the black influence of all these different genres, like, I can't even begin to express my level of appreciation for all of this and appreciation for all these genres and the history of them. And it was just so cool. I was talking to my wife about it, and I think and hope that my kids, I don't expect them to watch these videos now. It's literally like when they're teenagers or something like that. But I really hope that through this video, or just through me talking to them about these things in the future, they grow to have a very similar appreciation too. So yeah, I'm going to end my video there. Thank you for spending your time with me. I have 1 hour and 50 minutes to try to get this uploaded, technically for Black History Month. So nothing to it but to do it. And I have to edit down about 20 minutes worth of footage. So let me know what you think. Let me know what else you want me to talk about. Like, share, subscribe, smash the like button. 1,000 subscribers. Let's do it. Let's go. And for my next video, I'm going to talk about how I'm going to be teaching my kids about democracy and liberty, and also fascism. So that's going to be fun. So if that sounds interesting to you, just follow along and make sure you hit the bell for my next upload, because baby, we going diving.